I first came across your work. When I was doing a master's in experimental psychology at Sussex about 25 years ago, and your book, The Essential Difference. Can you talk to us a little bit about the empathizing, systemizing dimensions and that theory of autism that you developed?
Yeah, because back then, um, the field of gender differences or sex differences in the mind was mostly focused on, I guess, on the one hand, visuospatial skills, which were meant to be sort of stronger in males on average, and then verbal ability, which was meant to be stronger in females on average. Um, but I was sort of coming at the area of gender differences because I was working in the field of autism. We just talked about that. And autism tends to be diagnosed more often in boys than girls. Um, Back then, it was about 4 males for every 1 female. Um, these days, the gap has narrowed a little bit as more girls and women are getting diagnosed, which is very good. But it's still about 3 males to every 1 female. Um, and I was kind of curious as to why were males more likely to end up with a diagnosis of autism. I also kind of wanted to connect what we knew about the profile, the cognitive profile of autistic people, with the field of sex differences or gender differences. And it didn't strike me that, we were looking at the right dimensions. Although language and spatial ability, they are important, I just wondered whether we were missing something. And I'd been looking in autism at social skills, and particularly what's called social cognition. So the ability to understand other people, but also specifically other people's minds. Sometimes it's referred to as theory of mind, being able to imagine what another person is thinking or feeling. And I think that kind of comes under a broader umbrella of empathy. So I kind of looked at the literature on whether there were any gender differences in empathy, and we started looking at that. But the other domain of the mind that we were looking at in autism was what I called systemizing. So systemizing is defined as the ability or the drive to analyze a system, any system, where systems are defined as things that follow rules or patterns. So it's quite an abstract definition, but it would encompass things like mathematics or music or chess or the weather or the technology that we're talking through right now, digital systems. I was looking at these because when we were meeting autistic people, often we were finding, strong interests or even talents in understanding systems, but nevertheless some difficulties or struggles with understanding people, and particularly the mental states of other people, their thoughts and feelings. And so we kind of looked at autism as potentially an extreme of the typical male pattern of development. So irrespective of the gender of the person, we were saying, if you are autistic, is it the case that you may struggle with some aspects of empathy, particularly what's called cognitive empathy, or being able to imagine the thoughts and feelings of another person. But alongside that, might you have an aptitude and an ability to understand systems and patterns in the world? So that's what we kind of set out to study, and we did this by developing some questionnaires. The empathy quotient is one of them, and the systemizing quotient is another. These are self-report questionnaires, so people can just answer how strongly they agree or disagree with a statement about whether they can easily tune into what someone else is thinking or feeling. So that's on the empathy side of things, or whether they have a strong interest in patterns and systems, like how computers work, or as another example, spotting patterns in numbers. And that study that you referred to in 2018, it's come, we're jumping way ahead because the book The Essential Difference was published in 2003. But we'll just kind of jump ahead to a big online study, because many of the earlier studies were smaller. And I know your podcast is particularly interested in big data. But the 2018 study, we were able to sort of put those questionnaires up online and get 600,000 non-autistic people to take both questionnaires, and also 36,000 autistic people. And, people can look up the results, but we did find gender differences, quite robust gender differences. We have to be very careful when we talk about these results, because scientists who are listening will know that we're just talking about group averages. But some listeners may sort of mistakenly conclude that we're talking about findings that apply to all women or all men. But they are just, overlapping bell curves in the population. But we found that on average, females scored higher in terms of empathy compared to men. And on average, men scored higher in systemizing compared to women. And when it came to autistic people, they seemed to show an extreme of the typical male pattern. So scoring below average on empathy and above average on systemizing. So I've kind of wrapped all this into a theory. You mentioned it, but it's called the Empathising-Systemising Theory. And it's simultaneously a new way of looking at gender differences, but also hopefully a helpful way to understand autistic people, that they have a different kind of mind. And actually, I think it's very compatible with what we call neurodiversity these days. That minds are different in the population. We can only really look at group averages, but autism seems to represent one of those styles, cognitive styles, and other kinds of groups in the population, like the genders, but not limited to that, also show different profiles when you have big data.
To find out what kind of data storyteller you are, why not take our data storytelling scorecard? It takes just 2 minutes to complete and will give you a personalized report right away. Visit data-storytelling.scoreapp.com or follow the link in the show notes.